high note. We finished off with a webinar on engaging youth with 3 presenters, and we're hoping to have a number of relevant webinars every month for the rest of the year. And we're looking at topics like this one here, Ukutwala, maybe even perhaps financial literacy. So all topics that I think are relevant to and current, maybe even including persons in trafficking in persons. But you'll be informed so long as you've registered and we've got your details. We'll forward you details about our future webinars. So with this morning's one, as the topic says, we'll be discussing intergenerational or transactional sexual relationships, otherwise known as the Blessee relationships. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm going to introduce you to our presenter this morning. Welcome, Sibongile. Sibongile is a clinical psychologist based at the University of Pretoria, and she's in the student counseling unit where she provides therapeutic support to students navigating a range of mental health challenges. She completed her PhD in psychology through University of South Africa with a research focusing on adolescent health and vulnerabilities. Sexual risk behavior and socioeconomic dynamics influencing intergenerational and transactional sexual relationships. Sibongile, I'm going to hand the floor to you as such to take us through the topic this morning.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Anissa, for the introduction and for the opportunity to share the work that I've done for my PhD thesis. I have prepared slides. Can I please share them?
Sibongile, you are a co-host. You can share your screen.
The slides are visible, right? Can you see my slides? Can you?
Yes, we can see it. I think everybody can. I can.
Okay, thank you. So I will proceed. So my topic for today then is intergenerational sexual relationships amongst adolescent girls and young women. And so for my PhD study, I used a qualitative methodology and, I formed co-constructions with the participants that I was interviewing. So I would just like to open up with a piece that was shared by one of the participants that I interviewed. I hope that, the extract that I'm about to read to you right now will prompt you to think about, the resources and information that you have at hand, or maybe are starting to think about in terms of, what can help vulnerable young girls and adolescent women that are finding themselves in blessee relationships. And usually these girls, they get into these relationships because, they feel like they have no other option because of a lack of financial means and a lack of also emotional support from their families. So I'm just going to read this piece as we think together about how we can possibly help these young people. Okay, so it goes like this. I was very passionate about my studies. I remember how passionately I would debate and sometimes even won debate competitions at a national level. I represented my high school very well. My teachers were really proud of me. The challenge was that the life that I was living at home and at my former boyfriend's home distracted me from focusing on my books, even though I loved them. I was a vice president in grade 11. My teachers had a lot of confidence in my leadership abilities. I was born a leader. Even yesterday, I was thinking about my past successes. But I just don't know. It hurts. It is not going to be easy to pick up my old self. Though I do believe that it is possible because I can feel it in me. It has not died. It hurts to lose it when you know you have it within yourself. Actually, before you came, she was now referring to me, I was reminiscing about the things that used to make me feel proud and give me a sense of dignity. Even my mom could see the great things that I was doing and used to encourage me. The only question that worries me is why? Why was it that my family did not give me support? Because if they did, I would have perhaps changed their lives for the better. It is a pity that by hurting me, they in turn ended up hurting themselves because the things that they wanted to have, they ended up not having. Okay. Okay, so I was very curious as I was embarking on my research, to find out if really it is a blessing, is it a blessing to be in a relationship with a blesser, as the term has been colloquially termed, right? So prior to collecting data from my research participants, I made a few reflections, personal and professional ones, of what came to my mind regarding this point or question. So I thought about the potential benefits, firstly being maybe that of financial stability. I thought that maybe having an older partner may offer financial support, which can alleviate, the immediate financial distress that young women might find themselves. I also thought that maybe emotional maturity, dating an older person can provide, the person can provide more life experience and emotional depth, potentially leading to a more stable relationship, right? But I also thought about the possible drawbacks of being, in a blessed relationship for these young women in particular. I thought about, the lack of long-term commitment, because we know that with blessed relationships, they are non-marital relationships because these blessed are already married themselves. So I thought that, if marriage is an important thing for the young women, how would that affect them as the relationship progresses? Would it maybe cause emotional distress, or maybe would it lead to dissatisfaction in the long run? I also thought about, the power imbalances to say, if now the young women are depending so much financially on older men, what does then it say about, their ability to be autonomous and the ability to make decisions for themselves? Wouldn't that be a challenge maybe in the long run? I also thought about the emotional impact of being in such a relationship. If there is no long-term commitment, how would that affect the well-being of these young women? And I also found the study conducted by Mamba and Shongwe in 2022 in South Africa in the Eastern Cape that showed that 82.8% of African women involved in, there were 82.8% of African women involved in intergenerational sexual relationships. So this study was conducted in an impoverished area in the Eastern Cape.
Confirmation email. To join.
Okay, so yeah, the study was conducted at a high school consisting of about 18 participants in total. So out of those 18 participants, 82.8% of them were found to be in relationships with older men known as blessers. Okay. So how does the blessee phenomenon matter in psychology? In other words, how can psychologists effectively support clients experiencing distress due to socio-economic challenges or lack of emotional support that may influence their decisions to engage in financial supportive relationships with blessers? Okay, so regarding the context, many young women from impoverished backgrounds engage in blessee relationships with older men for financial security and luxuries. And this is also true for my study. Most of the young women engaged in these relationships mostly because of financial deprivation. So luxuries were not a thing that really prompted them to be in the relationship, other than the fact that maybe if the blesser then offered to, support them with more than what they needed. Otherwise, the main contributing factors was really a need, a dire need to have their basic needs met. And then the key issues, as we've been mentioning, economic hardships is, one of the first and top key issues here. Social media, which obviously, it presents Blessee relationships as this very attractive, personal relationships for young people, but we know that there can be really dire and negative consequences and repercussions from those kinds of relationships. Gender inequality, social norms, so psychological vulnerability also drive these behavior, and I'll elaborate further on these points as continue to present. And then the objective. I will be presenting a model that integrates the psychological, social, and economic interventions to address this issue effectively, and also to see actually how psychologists can proactively engage with clients that are presenting with distress due to Blessee relationships. Okay, so definitions. I thought that it was also very important that we just reflect on what the key definitions are for this talk. So the first one, intergenerational sexual relationships. These are known as cross-generational relationships or age mixing, entailing sexual relationships. So usually the literature says that these are relationships that have a significant age gap, and really it's a subjective one. Usually it says that it's between 10 and plus more years, but I found that it varies from scholar to scholar. And then the definition of transactional sex. This entails a non-marital sexual relationship that is motivated by an implicit assumption that sex will be exchanged for material support or other benefits. Okay, so I've had a lot of questions from colleagues asking if now Blessee relationships are a form of sex work, and I felt like we can maybe even discuss that in today's talk. So I would like to argue that Blessee relationships are not a form of sex work, that Blessee relationships are not actually sex work, mainly because we know that sex work is criminalized in South Africa, whereas Blessee relationships are not. And then there's also the aspect of emotional attachment. In Blessee relationship, there is an aspect of emotional attachment, because you find that the relationships, are not so short-lived as that in sex work, right? In sex work, you find that it can just be a once-off encounter that the people have with each other, and then that's it. They never see each other again. But in Blessee relationships, there is a form of, emotional attachment where the relationships tend to be more longer lasting, right? And then also, there are some family members and communities that actually support Blessee relationships, and sometimes it's even seen as some kind of social prestige, especially for men. Therefore, you find that men tend to, or desire to have a relationship with a younger person. Whereas in sex work, it's usually frowned upon, and it's also morally judged quite harshly. So for both the intergenerational sexual relationships and the transactional sex, these two relationships, they inform what Blessee relationships are, and how the Blesser and Blessee experience the relationship. And then the consequences of Blessee relationships, is we have seen in the literature, is that there's an increased risk of HIV/AIDS because of the imbalanced power dynamics, unintended pregnancies as well, school dropouts, and long-term long-term psychological harm. So, with the financial dependence that Blessees tend to have on the blessers, you find that their ability to be autonomous, the ability to leave the relationship when they want to, becomes really restricted. Thereby, they're exposed to things like HIV/AIDS, unintended pregnancies, as well as school dropouts, which then severely really affects their future in a negative way. So now I'm going to be looking at, the theoretical framework. But before I do that, I just want to also take you through a poem that was shared by me by one of the participants. This poem is a reflection of, how they have experienced their childhood and how they are thinking about their future. Okay, and I hope that it will also inform how I've conceptualized the theoretical framework here. Okay, so the poem is entitled From Grass to Grass. How did we survive those days? Those days when the cupboard was dry and bare while we went from grass to grass. Babies were created by men who should never be called fathers and women who had no clue. One would think that they thought raising children was like eating peanuts or chips from a packet while staring off into the distance. How did we make it through the dry blend colors of hunger through the winters? Did we make it? A kind firm hand on your shoulder from Granny was all the food we had. Granny tried, God knows. She sold some snacks and made next to nothing from that. And we stole the snacks when we got the opportunity. How did we make it? Please be aware that some didn't make it. How did we make it? Did we make it? We had diamonds on the soles of our shoes, as the singer sings, but mostly no shoes when you go from grace to grass. Leaving homes that were empty when you left for school and bare when you returned. You had to take a stick of wood to school to start the fire if you wanted a meal. Even that was asking too much from us for whom survival depended on our own and on daily meal of brown beans and mealie. Do you wonder why we turn? Why we turn for payment to the blesser? Do you wonder? Thank God, some like me escaped starvation to tell of our journeys and our stories as we went from grace to grass. How did we make it? Did we make it? Okay, yes, so that was a poem that was written by one of the participants. As I said, she's basically just troubled by the fact that even though she was or still is in a relationship with a blesser, but there's a feeling of just being stuck, with this question of, how did we make it? Did we actually make it? Are we living the lives that we want to live? You remember with the story that I shared, where the participant was talking about her being, a born leader and pursuing her goals, her dreams, is the fact that now she's in a relationship with a blesser, is she still able to pursue those ambition of hers, Is she still able to do the things that matter to her? Or does she feel like, yeah, even though the blesser is providing financially, but then is still not, it's not a relationship that enables her to thrive completely and do the things that she would like to do. Okay. All right, and then coming now to the theoretical framework, I'm going to discuss firstly the attachment theory, then I'll move on to Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems. Okay, so attachment theory provides a framework for understanding how early relationships with caregivers influence an individual's ability to form and maintain emotional bonds in adulthood, right? So I've basically applied this theory to my study and just try to make sense of the findings. So here it says that early attachment patterns influence relationship choices, leading to emotional dependency on older men who provide financial security. So it makes sense, with young ladies that were participants in my study, they were not getting the emotional support, they were not getting the financial support from their families. So, they were forced by circumstances to look outside of their families for people who were willing and able to fill in that gap. Okay, so inadvertently, their attachment style became insecure because there was no parental figure or caregiver that could consistently meet their needs. Therefore, I'm reflecting now firstly on the avoidant and anxious, preoccupied style of attachment. So young women with neglectful or inconsistent parental relationships may seek security and validation from older partners, because it seems like now the older partners actually now were replacing, the roles that their parents were not able to play or to fulfill. So they had no choice, no other alternatives than to actually look outside of their homes and to find people that were able to do so. Older men may assume a paternal role in reinforcing emotional dependency. I mean, now with the Blesses, that's why I was saying that, it differs from sex work, because now these Blesses, they present themselves as very loving, caring, they will buy these young women lunch, they would buy them clothes, they would take them to restaurants, all of those things, so there's also that caring aspect that the young women sometimes appreciate so much because they are not getting it from their homes. But then here it comes at a cost, because now they have to be intimate with this older person, and usually it's according to the older person's terms, of how the intimacy needs to take place and when and so forth. And then the second one is the fearful avoidant attachment style. So young women tend to crave closeness by fearing emotional. Some young women, they fear emotional intimacy. Some young women engage in blessed relationships for financial security without vulnerability. So some, because of the financial deprivation that they have experienced, and the neglectful, parental style also that they have experienced, they might fear being also vulnerable to the next person. They might fear just opening up about their emotions, about their thoughts to the next person, because when maybe they have tried to do so, that wasn't received well, or the kind of reciprocation that one might expect wasn't the case. So perhaps they grow up thinking that, actually nobody cares. Nobody cares enough to tend to my needs. Nobody cares enough to actually listen to what I'm going through. So, the style of then relating to other people, it's a matter of, okay, let's just work on what I can get out of you and what you can get out of me, but not really, involving emotions, or not really, attaching, emotions in the relationship as such. And then, overall, there's this inadvertent, power imbalance and reinforcement that is so clear in Blessee relationships. Older men control access to resources, making it difficult for young women to leave. Which was very clear also with my participants, that even sometimes when they were experiencing acts of gender-based violence, especially, in terms of how the Blesses wanted intimacy to take place, if it was in their own terms, some women said that it was very dehumanizing and degrading, but because Blesses had the upper hand in terms of the resources that they were providing, it made it very difficult for them to say, okay, but I don't want to do this, or, I'm going to leave this relationship because you are subjecting me to humiliation here. So for young women not to have access to resources, really, it puts them at a disadvantage. It makes them to be dependent on people that tend to exploit them. So I hope that, this presentation is an invitation, as presenting as an invitation that we can think of, what resources are available to help these young women so that they don't fall into such relationships. Okay, so the second theory that I applied in my research is Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. So here we look at the interconnectedness of the different systems and spaces that young women find themselves in, and how they can inform how they live their day-to-day lives. Okay, so firstly, we start off with a microsystem. So this refers to the immediate environment. So the family influence, right? So poverty or neglectful parenting may push young women into transactional relationships or into blessee relationships. I think that is very clear. We have already elaborated on that. Peer influence as well. If friends normalize blessee relationships, it becomes socially acceptable, So if there is, friends or peers that in these kinds of relationships and they are, spreading the gospel of, the benefits and the gains and how good it is, more young people also would obviously like to experience that for themselves and to experience the benefits of being in such a relationship. However, I think that the conversation needs to be two-sided. We need to be speaking about if there are gains, what are the gains, if they potential, downfalls or disadvantages. Also, that needs to be touched upon, so that a person can also make an informed decision. I think most of the time, social media just, speaks about the potential gains, but then it doesn't speak about now the negatives, the disadvantage is of being in such relationships. Romantic relationships, older men may provide financial security in exchange for intimacy. So then that is the expectation, with blessers. They expect young women to exchange sexual favors, so it wouldn't be the case that the older man is just providing finances without an expectation for intimacy, So that's where the problem can be, because then, as we said, it can lead to, unintended, unplanned pregnancies. Okay, moving on to the mesosystem, which then connects the microsystems that we have just spoken about. So we look at the family-school relationship. If families struggle with school fees, for example, young women may seek financial assistance from older men. So we also need to think about then how do families be empowered, where can parents be referred to, what are the financial resources that we can start thinking about so that young women who are in high schools don't feel the need to go elsewhere, to go to older men, because now, they're not able to afford stationery, they're not able to afford school fees, they're not able to afford, things that they need to thrive on a day-to-day basis. If they need a laptop, they shouldn't be thinking about, I need to get a blesser. If they need a cell phone, if they need data, they shouldn't, the first thing that comes to mind shouldn't be a blesser. It should be, okay, I need to maybe contact my school teacher. I need to contact maybe or speak to a peer at school, maybe if there's a counselor at school, I need to contact that person. Then that person can channel me to the resources that are available. A blesser shouldn't even be a consideration, according to my opinion. School peer influence. So lack of sexual education may leave young women unaware of risks. So the sexual education part, I believe that it needs to take place within the home institution with parents or caregivers, first things first. However, if that is bypassed, then it needs to be integrated within the curriculum at school so that young women know that, there is a phenomenon like the blessee relationships and, what it does to a young woman's life trajectory. So this needs to be an open conversation. It cannot be a conversation that's had when now the young woman is trying to pick up their pieces after, things didn't go right with the blesser. So it needs to be an open conversation to say, yes, there are there are older men that will pursue you, but, what happens? What are the expectations realistically? Will you as a young woman be able to keep up with those expectations, and what are the psychological and as well as social repercussions that you might be left with and might have to deal with long term. Community support networks. The absence of mentors or safe spaces increases vulnerability. So perhaps in the impoverished communities, one can look a little bit deeper into, what safe spaces are there for them, and how are these communicated to the people in the community so that, the information is there. And then as well as media and social expectations, the glorification of luxury lifestyles promotes blessee relationships, which is very true. That's why I'm saying that, open conversations like these need to be held at school levels. We need to be talking about what are blessee relationships, what are transactional sexual relationships, what are intergenerational sexual relationships, how do they affect young people, and so forth, So social media sometimes provides, information that can be correct and empowering, but sometimes it can also be misleading, especially for a young person, maybe who's also not able to discern, what can be good for them, So we as professionals and people that are interested in working with young people, we need to be the people that actually take the correct information to them so that they can make more informed decisions for themselves. Gender norms. Societal structures reinforce male financial dominance. Yes, there is a belief in our communities that, a male person needs to provide financially and so forth, which is okay. But then what does it say then to the young person, to the adolescent and young women? Does it mean that they need to now depend on a male person that's providing financially? And what does it say about the autonomy and decision making? So we also need to challenge such gender norms and also reinforce that, as young women, you're still able to do things for yourself, you're still able to empower yourself, being dependent on an older man, is not the only way of looking, of going about your life and thinking about your future. There are so many other alternatives and ways of being that can be explored, so that you don't find people now having to attend counseling or being traumatized from being in relationships with maybe a blesser. So the ecosystem, these are the systems that have an indirect influence on the young person's trajectory. Firstly, the economic conditions. For example, high youth unemployment makes financial reliance on older men more common, which is very true. Macro system, cultural and societal influences, cultural expectations. Some communities normalize age gap relationships. And really, this, I think, is a subjective thing. Age gap relationships can be fine. However, I think the autonomy and decision making just need to be put in place, so that even if the girl is significantly younger than the older man, they should still be having a voice in a relationship in terms of what it is that they would like to do with their life, and still be allowed the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. Legal and policy frameworks. Weak legal protections leave young women vulnerable to exploitation. If a young person is not trusting also of the legal system, or if they've been previously disappointed by it, then it makes it also highly unlikely for them to report maybe cases of GBV and the likes. Chrono system changes over time. Personal transitions. Losing a parent or dropping out of school may increase reliance on an older man, and these are things that really can happen to anyone at any point in time, right? But then what we are talking about here is that, but what are the support structures that are in place to support young people that are going through these kinds of circumstances and challenges? Societal shifts, economic downturns, and social media influence financial aspirations. So, as we said, these are conversations that we really need to have with young people. Anissa also spoke about financial literacy. Even if, social media is saying, all right, so this is the life to live, you can get a man, get rich fast, but then, are we talking about school? Are we talking about how young people can be financially literate? Are we talking about how they can develop their resilience? Are we talking about resources and support structures that can enable them to actually be independent and autonomous in their own rights now? Okay. So, literature has also cited some of the key barriers to change, change in the sense that, it seems like more young women are turning to older men, turning to blessers, just so that they can experience that relief, financial relief from time to time. So the structural barriers are as follows: poverty, lack of education, limited economic opportunities. Okay. And then social and cultural barriers, normalization of blessee relationships, family pressures, gender power imbalances. Okay. In one of my participants, they mentioned that, there was an expectation from the family for her to provide for the family financially, even though she was still at school. But then it's almost like the family was actually pushing her to be in a relationship with a blesser, even though they were not explicitly saying it, so that's where the normalization of such relationships comes to play. It's okay, but now if, nobody is working at home and there's a young girl in the home, but the parents or the caregivers are expecting that same person to be the one that's coming up with the financial means. Yeah. Psychological barriers, low self-esteem, trauma, and also emotional dependence. I have no doubt that there's quite significant amount of trauma that these young women experience in relationship with blessers, especially because they are so, silenced in a way in those relationships to a certain extent. If you are financially depending on someone like that, there's so much that you can do or say in that relationship because you want to keep that relationship going so that you can still get, the financial security that you need at the time. So, it's very sad that young women have to endure such hardships. Implementation changes. Sometimes there can be maybe funding limitations and also, measuring behavioral challenges or changes over time can be a bit of a challenge, but maybe we can talk about how that can be done. Okay, so the proposed model and intervention that I have come up with, I will just discuss it and then please let us just have a discussion around this. Let us engage with it so that we can also maybe try to make it practical for our adolescent young girls and young girls. Okay, so I have divided the interventions here into three. There's primary, secondary, and tertiary. The reason why I've done this is that as a clinical psychologist, I think that it would be very, very rare for me to be in contact with a young person that is vulnerable and that is at risk of being in a relationship with a blesser. So I would only be in contact, let's say maybe with a young person from the secondary and tertiary intervention. That's why I felt that, we need also people that are usually interacting with these young person on a day-to-day basis to also be proactively involved. Okay, so the primary intervention so centers around the issue of psychoeducation. As I was saying that, we need to have open conversations about these kinds of relationships and to point out, the risk factors that are associated with these kinds of relationships. And also, as I said, if you can see at the provider under the primary interventions, for instance, school teachers can become involved, peer supporters at the school level can become involved because these are people that in contact with young people. These are people that can spot and notice if a young person is struggling, if a young person is not coping, if a young person is not in a good space. These are the people that can actually escalate, the issue to myself and colleagues to say, okay, this young person actually needs some kind of assistance. So yes, so for the primary intervention, we are looking at young women who are at risk of being in a relationship with a blesser, and maybe some of the things that have come to my attention as I was conducting my study that can propel young people to think of or to be at risk of such relationships is, the mental health history of their parents. I found that one of the issues that makes also parents not to be totally attuned to their children's needs is because of their own mental health suffering. When they're also not in a good space emotionally, it makes it very difficult for them to be attuned to their children's needs. So therefore, we just also need to trace it back to say, okay, but then if this young person is struggling, we see that, they're not in a good space, they are struggling. What is going on within the family context? Who are they staying with? What kind of support do they have if any at all. And then we can maybe also look at interventions that can help the caregivers themselves so that they can be empowered to be better parents and, to actually be present for their children. And, that speaks to, things like family structure and dynamics, what's happening within the families of these children, is it something that can be worked towards or not? If not, then, how then does the system accommodate this young person so that they can still be able to thrive, even if maybe the family situation is not conducive. So we really need to take it there. Okay. And then secondary interventions. So secondary interventions, these are young people that are already, in a blessee relationships. However, we can see that they are not doing well, their mental health is taking a toll, their well-being is not also nurtured. So some of the things that might point out that these young women are suffering, we might see things like, early pregnancies, we might see maybe cases of gender-based violence or them maybe reporting gender-based violence. We might see them maybe dropping even out of school because of, the involvement in these kinds of relationships. So therefore, from the primary interventions, then the people like the school teachers, the peer supporters, if they are trained lay counselors within that space, then they can escalate and refer these young people to a clinical psychologist or school social workers so that more investigations can be done and to see actually what are the needs. But however, if the mental health and well-being continues to further deteriorate for the young person, then we need to escalate the issue then to tertiary interventions where then clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, as well as clinical social workers can become of assistance. And usually here, also with my participants, we found that, some young people tend to substance use. Some were presenting with symptoms of anxiety and depression. Some had suicidal ideation. Some resorted, to self-harming behaviors. And at the very worst, there was a client also that had psychosis due to their use of substances. So then when it's at that phase, then the young person can actually be admitted at, can be admitted then at a psychiatric facility so that they can get the assistance that they need. But then, as I was saying, I think most importantly here is that the young person's needs to be taken into context. So we need the full background and context of the young person. Who are they staying with? What are the support structures in place? Is are the dynamics of the family able to improve or not? If not, then what else can be explored for the young person? So it cannot be that the young person needs to just be left, in that family because, it is what it is. I believe that, more can be done, more can, as long as the young person also wants to, better their lives, wants to, a better future for themselves. I believe that, they can be, resources that the young person can be equipped with that can enable them to thrive without having to think or rely on a blessing. Okay, so in summary, the proposed model and intervention really speaks to psychological and educational programs. So at the primary intervention level, we're looking at things like self-esteem and resilience workshops. We're looking at trauma-informed counseling and peer support networks, especially in the primary and secondary interventions. We are looking at comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education at the primary intervention. Okay. And secondly, we are also looking at community and policy interventions. Legal advocacy for stricter protections for these young women, as well as awareness campaigns targeting families and communities, as I had mentioned for the primary intervention. We're also looking at economic empowerment, very, very important, vocational training and job placement programs, as well as financial literacy and entrepreneurship initiatives. Because as I said, the outstanding factor that propels these young women into blessee relationships is, just lack of finances, lack of their basic needs being met. So if they can find, opportunities that can provide them with some sort of income, that would also be appreciated. Okay, so in terms of now, how do we make this practical? We need to think about the implementation strategy. I was thinking that, as a psychologist, I cannot do this alone. It's not going to be possible. It's not even going to be easy doing this alone because I'm not in contact with these young women on a day-to-day, even though I wish I was, so we definitely need a multi-sector collaboration, which will involve, partnering with NGOs, government agencies, businesses, as well as schools. We also need evidence-based monitoring, which would involve, tracking progress through surveys, case studies, and focus groups. So really it speaks about just redirecting the paths of these young women and, tracking it over time, are the interventions, is the intervention working, if we are going to redirect them to, resources that are able to just steer them off from from blessee relationships, and then sustainability measures, ensuring long-term impact through policy integration and continuous funding of such interventions is also very crucial. Okay, so the expected outcomes. So I was thinking that, we would expect improved mental health and self-worth of these young women. We would expect to reduce cases of transactional sex and associated risks, definitely. We'd expect increased economic independence among young women, so even if they are not yet at a position where actually they are generating an income, but in terms of also their thinking and mindset, if a young person can believe that they can do it because, there is information, because there are opportunities, there are resources, I think that's the kind of thing that I would like to see happening more, rather than to say, there's, pra so-and-so, there's, opa so-and-so. Greater awareness, societal awareness and policy engagement as well. Okay, so conclusion, we are coming towards the end of the presentation. So the key takeaway message is that, addressing blessee relationships requires a multi-layered approach which integrates psychological, social, and economic solutions. It's not just a psychological matter, it's not just a social matter. Really, it requires, a multi-pronged, multi-layered approach whereby, we come together, we think together, and we offer, viable solutions as to how this phenomenon can be challenged. Next steps, okay, so we need youth advocacy, awareness around this particular conversation, funding for interventions, pilot programs, definitely to see what works, what are the challenges, what doesn't work, and stakeholder engagement. So as a call to action, I feel like collaboration is really essential. One cannot do this kind of work by themselves, so please join the movement for change by supporting community programs, advocating for policy reforms, and mentoring young women at risk. Okay, so I am done. Thank you very much. I have completed my presentation, so comments and questions are most welcome.
Thank you so much, Sibongile. The presentation has been so in-depth, so informative. I think there's lots of points that people can pick up on. I'm going to open the floor up for questions or comments. Please feel free to ask. I see our audience includes some also critical thinkers and academics, and that's really great. So I would love to hear from some of our participants. Okay, sorry, I see we have some hands. Diane?
Sibongile, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very thought-provoking. So I wanted to touch on three things. The first was the difference between sex work and Blessee relationships. I think although both engage in transactional sex, I think it's important for us to also remember in the South African context, although sex work is still criminalized, that sex workers are people who are over the age of 18, who self-identify as sex workers, and the relationship they have or the transaction they have with their clients is very specific. I do, however, think, because it's criminalized, a lot of the power that sex workers have in context where sex work is decriminalized also makes that relationship very different. So I think the Blessee relationship, as you've highlighted, one, there is the huge age disparity, there is the lack of power in negotiation. And in terms of the recommendations you're making, I do think, we really do need a better collaboration. But I think we also need to have solutions that factor and take into our account the actual realities that we live in the South African context. Resources are limited. It is quite sad. And I was in the Eastern Cape and I also engaged with young women, and, they were saying, our parents know and encourage us to date sometimes the principal, sometimes the pastor, all these older men, so that you can feed the family. And it's almost seen, and I don't want to compare it to black tax, that, you're older, you must bring something into the home. And maybe what we need to look at is how do we kind of, and I'm not trying to be punitive, but hold the whole ecosystem accountable for these relationships. Based on our laws, we know about statutory rape. So the minute the child, there's that huge age disparity, how do we hold everybody accountable? Not only the partner, but also adults who are aware of these relationships, yet at the same time create social spaces or social spaces where families can be honest to say, we're struggling. How can the state assist us? And maybe that's my question is, how do we, because we've got grants, but grants are clearly not enough. How do we create platforms and spaces where people can say, as a family, we're struggling. How do we access resources, and where do these resources come from? Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Okay, thank you for your
Thank you,
comments.
Sibongile. You can go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, thank you for your reflections and comments. Yes, I do hear that. We are in a country whereby the resources are constrained. But then my issue is that, turning to places should be the last resort. Turning to places should be, I feel like, more should still be explored. Yes, there are grants and all of that, but I feel like we need to also change the narrative. I feel like places shouldn't be part of the narrative that helps young women to get out of poverty, or helps young women to think about, okay, how are they going to improve their socioeconomic standing? I feel like we should be talking about education. We should be talking about things along that line, but the places shouldn't be part of the narrative at all.
Sibongile, I just want to refer to the chat quickly before Bukilwa and Sindisiwe, I'll give you a chance now. So I think questions around your openness to presenting schools or to school leaders, right? So I'm just going to put it out there. I don't know if you want to respond now before we move on to the other two raised hands.
Or my openness to presenting at schools.
Yes, like approaching school leaders and schools and doing presentations at schools, or making your presentation available at schools as well. I think the idea is, we spoke about targeting young girls at schools.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have a problem with that actually. And with the model that I've presented, it speaks to that as well, just touching base with the school teachers, finding out, what programs do they have at schools that speaks to this current phenomenon and how we can collaborate at that level as well. So yes, I would.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, Bukelwa, your hand is raised. You want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Sibongile, for your presentation. I think it was great and eye-opening. My first comment or question would be, what do you think the role of me as a mother or the family in actually trying to, because prevention for me is better than trying to cure what is already taking place. Now my child, my daughter is suffering and we are suffering, and you said peer pressure and so on. And they think the best way to assist us as a family is the issue of Blessee relationship. What do you think our role as mothers and parents, fathers, should be in educating our 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and moving forward, so that at least when they are approached, then at least they've got a basis? That's my first question. My second question is, I hear you speaking mostly about the Blessee relationship in a male-female relationship. What about the other way, where the blesser is a woman and the blessee is a boy? Have you done research on that? And how does your research reflect that? I know maybe it's a few cases, but if you can share your thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
All right, so thank you for that, Bukelwa. Very interesting questions. Let me start off with the one where you said, so in some instances, there are women who are blessers, and you find that the blessee now is a man. I didn't touch base with that at all in my research, but I mean, it is a phenomenon that is happening. And I assume that the dynamics as well maybe are similar, to the one that's happening with men and women. But I wonder, if there are increased acts of GBV, enacted by the women to the men. I don't think that is the case actually. But I think that is very interesting, and maybe one can look more into that. But when I read a little bit on that, there were the psychological effects on the men were not as dire as the ones that are experienced by younger women. Okay. And then in terms of how, mothers and fathers can support their children, so that, that can be a sort of prevention from them entering these blessee relationships. I think first and foremost is to have, these conversations with our children, to speak about the fact that these relationships do exist, what are they, and, the risks that they pose towards their well-being and mental health, to, as I indicated, to actually educate them also and how they can take care of themselves, have that sex education with them. So that's the first, I think, the education and just having, that open conversation, open and honest conversation with them. And then secondly, we can look at, things like just being present, to our children, being present emotionally, financially, so that also when we are talking and educating them, but practically we are doing, we are acting, basically we are doing the things that we are preaching to them. So, we are providing, the financial means and emotional support that they need, so that they would know that even if, the going gets tough, they can still go back to, their caregivers or parents for the support that they need. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sibongile. Bukelwa, are your questions answered adequately?
Yes, thank you so much, Sibongile. Yeah, I think they are answered quite, because I think we need to stress my role as a parent in preventing this before taking it to school. So I think Sibongile has come up with some good ideas. Thank you so much.
Definitely. I do think that perceptions need to change, even perceptions like basic stuff around gender and education, the importance of education, relationships. So we need to revisit a whole lot of the values and perceptions around those. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to give us, thank you for your patience, Cindy Siwe, and I see another hand up from Berenice. So Cindy Siwe, do you want to go next?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Anissa. Good morning, everyone. Sibongile, thank you so much for this presentation. I think this is something that we can also take on the ground level and take it running, especially when we do awareness campaigns and dialogues within our communities. This can really help us a lot. So we really appreciate this, and I'm sure that we can take some of the interventions and some of the things that you have shared with us here and go to our communities and really educate and empower them, especially in a sense of prevention, you know, because a lot is going on. So this will really help us. And I think another thing that I wanted to raise, especially with this webinar that we had that was troubling me, just I think a few days ago, if I'm not mistaken, there was a new poster, a gender-based violence poster that was launched by the Premier of KZN. And it had a tag that said asibathande singababulali. And then there was a line that said sibaphe imali, which means let's not kill them, let's love them, let's give them money. So I feel that in some way we are all in this fight towards gender-based violence, but we are fighting in different directions. We are pulling in different directions. So I don't know how we can all work together and, you know, not confuse the communities, because now that's Sibaphe Imali. Already we are here on this webinar talking about blessers and preventing that. But then on the other hand, we are saying, provide the money, provide the money, provide the money. So it's like we are contradicting ourselves. So we need to find a way where we all come together and share the same common information to the community and not confuse people. Thank you.
Yes, no, absolutely. I do agree, because also when you're saying give them money, sibaphe imali, it's like you are not addressing, you know, the factors that made the young person not to have money in the first place, you know, the factors that led them to be vulnerable in the way that they are, you know. So sibaphe imali, really it's not even empowering, you know, sibaphe imali, and then when it
Yes.
finishes, you give them more money,
More
give them,
money.
you know.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. The young person still won't be empowered, you know, they won't be at a space where one day they are in a position where they are able to generate their own income and make their own money and not rely on
Exactly.
level. So that's not the narrative that we want to advocate for at all. As you are saying that, you know, we need to think about, okay, but how can we talk about empowering young people, you know, even if they're from impoverished backgrounds, but then, you know, what other avenues need to be explored? You know, it cannot just be blessings. No, no, it cannot.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. I just want to refer again to the chat again. So thank you, Mr. Kulwani from DSD. We're happy to have you join us. Mr. Kulwani has mentioned approaching men's movements. So I've just asked him also how we can do that. It will be a great collaboration because we know that we need to work. I think it's so clear from this engagement, like Diane also said, collaboration, whether we're working with parents, whether we're working with the youth, whether we're working with men. So, you know, at different levels, I think the engagement needs to take place. And then also, a question from Mokotso around how do we bring these initiatives in the rural areas, which is also very, I mean, I think when we talk about different target groups, they become from the general to very specific, and I think also target groups within specific contexts also. So yes, Sibongile, I don't know if you want to respond to that, and then Berenice, we're going to go to you.
So the proposed model and intervention really it's for communities that are in the rural areas, communities that are from impoverished backgrounds. So it is proposed at this point in time. So that's why I was saying that we need, collaboration from different stakeholders to come to play and, policymakers so that we can actually bring this model to life and we can see then how it goes. But really, it is targeted for those impoverished communities where we know that a lot of people are struggling, so that we can actually implement the changes that we want to see.
Thank you for that, Berenice.
Thank you, Sibongile, for your presentation. It was really well prepared, very educational. I was just thinking that, I'm from Rape Crisis Center, and then we deal with a number of sex workers, but we also have children who selling sex. Those are ones that are under 18 years old. So often we find that in a family situation, it's very complex. In one family, you might find that the family is unemployed. And then the parent sometimes is aware that the children has to go out and, bring in some money to the family. So it's not just easy when we deal with young children. Often I was wondering that maybe our programs that we have as NGOs, we should actually look at how we can maybe be more relevant to our situation in what's happening in our society. So also another thing is that I was wondering that I'm happy there's someone from DSD. Sometimes we would send a young girl perhaps who's engaging in transactional sex, who's on the street or living with a pimp, etc., to DSD. And maybe the child is 16 or 17, and then there is really no help coming forth. So that child's life is basically, just it's basically nothing. So I was wondering, how do we as organizations develop skills to impart those skills to families? Because the starting point should really be the family, to educate the family. And I was also wondering in terms of what is out there for our young children. Yes, we say go to school, but then the same problems exist. There's unemployment at home, there's poverty at home. So how do we make it more easier for them? And then also one of the things we've noted is very difficult when children engage in transactional sex, that you don't often find them coming for psychosocial services. I'm talking about our experiences now. We have to go to them to actually send our social workers out. And then after that, we have support groups for them to get together. But the reality is after those, they go back to the same situation. So how do we change the narrative? I think it's very complex. Thank you.
Yeah, no, true. I do agree that it is a very, complex situation. But then I would like to just respond to the fact that, I mean, social workers, the family interventions, I think social workers can be, a great starting place, because then they can actually investigate, at the family level, what is going on, if people are working, if the mental health of the parents or caregivers is intact, are these people that can really, raise children, in that particular environment. So as you were saying that, I think those investigations really are crucial. They do need to take place because we cannot take for granted that, if a person is a mother, that then maybe they are fit to be a mother. We don't know, what circumstances make it very difficult or challenging for them to be a really present, a mother to their children. So I think that investigation does need to take place. And then in terms of, resistant teenagers or young people that you are working with, as you're saying that you offer them help and services, but they don't make follow-ups, you constantly need to go back to them. And as we know that, in therapy, the person needs to identify, particular need for themselves. They need to be the one that has the internal motivation, to seek the services and the support that they require for themselves. And I feel like, what we are doing, it is the best that we can do. We can certainly do more, but then, when we bringing about, awareness in the different platforms and spaces that we find ourselves, I think that can be a good starting point. But then we can definitely not now force a person, you understand, to get help if they are not ready. But I do believe that as long as there are awareness campaigns, as long as there is information, as long as there are free counseling services, because I know that sometimes people have said that counseling can be, so difficult or can be a deterrent because of the fees, but then there are also free counseling services like our mental health care partners, SEDEC, so there are those resources already in place. However, the person needs to be the one that decides if, they are ready to receive the help or not. And then regarding the DSD, maybe the personnel from DSD can respond to that. I'm not really sure what's happening there. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Speaking about Mr. Kulwani, sorry, I mentioned you in the platform, but Mr. Kulwani has responded to my earlier question around how do we access the men's movement, and he has shared a number on the chat, so you're free to refer to that, or else I can read it out for you. But also, someone asked about the rural areas. So Mr. Kulwani's mentioned that they do engage men in rural areas as well on all levels. So maybe you can grab that number. And also, Sibongile, I don't know if you'll be comfortable sharing your number. There's quite a lot of interest in wanting to access your work in different platforms. If you want to, you can share your number. In the meantime, I'm going to take Nadine. Nadine, you have your hand raised. Nadine, you're muted.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the presentation and that wonderful research. Just a quick question. If my computer goes off because the battery's going down, please won't you just put it in the recording, obviously. And excuse me. Just in terms of being a primary school social worker for a number of years, and now being a social worker in a safe house shelter, I don't know if it's just in my experience, but there's been so many people with attachment problems where they were raised by the granny until about 12 years old, and then uprooted, say, from the Eastern Cape to Cape Town and introduced to their biological mother in a new role. Was that significant in the studies, or did that not really stand out at all? Thank you.
Can you please repeat the question for me? I think I was just finding it difficult to hear. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
All right. I'm wanting to know if there were more of your participants who had a problem in their attachment relationships with their biological mothers, who were, for instance, raised by grannies who later passed away at a critical age in the child's development. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so with my participants, actually, they were raised by their parents. And, so the grandparents were not really present in their upbringing. However, the thing that made their parents not to be fully present and to fully tend to the participants' needs was that, they were, either busy with substances, or their mental health in general was not in a good standing, because of mental health issues that they didn't, consult for, or, which then later made them to cope in the form of using substances. So the parents were there, but not really there as well, So yeah, they were very much there. It wasn't a matter of, that their parents passed away, or that, their parents were not there. They were there, but they were just, there was an element of neglect, if I may put it like that. And they were also siblings, but that the emotional support really was lacking, and I think this was from birth. From birth. It's just that, when these when the participants reached, their teenage years, like maybe at around ages 12, 13, 14, then, it started becoming incredibly difficult for them to find that sense of belonging, even within their peers, because, there was a lot of lack, coming from the home situation, so they were constantly bullied, and it became very obvious also to their peers that, they were lacking in so many areas of their lives, and, that it sort of like created that, us versus them, so they were the them, so that the poverty was really so dire, and it affected a lot about them, even their self-esteem.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I certainly noticed the bullying aspect of it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Sibongile. I think we don't have any more hands raised. Sibongile has shared her email address in the chat. It's Sibongile, Sibongile, psychology, psychology@gmail.com. If anyone wants to get in touch with her, I'm sure, Sibongile, you'd be open to engaging with them. I know there's requests for sharing of the presentation and the slides. So I think, Sibongile, would you be okay if people contacted you directly on your email address?
No problem.
Thank you so much. We are particularly pleased to have you. It was a great collaboration. And we thank you again for agreeing to present at our webinar. It's added great value. And thank you to each one of you who took the time to join us this morning. And I'm hoping you'll join us for future webinars. Please watch the space, as they say. And on that note, we're going to close this webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
You